is what it always was at the conclusion of Dry Salvage's part 1, right? The furious storm through me, careening, look at all these ing words, careening, I passionately trembling, and then he gets to the oath, the promise. The oath of the inseparableness of two together. This we two together we're going to come back to and hear it again. Of the woman, we're back to Eve, that loves me and whom I love more than my life. That oath, swearing. The use of the word love here, by the way, is important. I told you guys, he doesn't use the word love that often in Leaves of Grass, and so anytime it happens, it's going to be fascinating. And some students will say, wait a minute, I thought that Whitman was gay. What's he talking about, this woman that he loves? What's going on here? Well, a couple of quick observations. Whitman's sexuality, and actually his own personal sexuality, has left scholars scratching their head for all the time. Now, of course, there's any number of ways that we can argue that Whitman had all kinds of relationships with other men, no question about that. But in his poetry, he's always playing games in regards to both male as well as female. So don't get hung up at all with this notion of the woman. And again, hello, it's children of Adam, and of course Adam procreates with Eve, right? As we'll get to in our Milton, obviously, in a moment even, right? Notice, again, the parenthetics. And again, he says, oh, again, the repetition of this oh, I willingly stake all for you. Notice the word stake here means risk, right? Oh, let me be lost if it must be so. This is his Dante reference, right? Lost in a dark wood of error, fine. If I've got to get lost, I'm going to get lost in this thing of love, right? Oh, you and I. Notice all the exclamation points, by the way. What is it to us what the rest do or think? Here, of course, the great iconoclast is saying, what do you care what other people think? This is between you and me. Now, let's just say it out loud. With the exception of Emily Dickinson, who, of course, we love so much in 303, there are very few poets who know how to reach out from the page and kind of grab the reader and say, hey, come here. I gotta tell you this, or I gotta show you this. It is a compelling way to kind of play that game that Shakespeare, of course, had taught Whitman of the soliloquy, right to the audience, right? What is it? What is all else to us? Only, he says, that we enjoy each other and exhaust each other, if it must be so. This use of the word exhaust is quite remarkable. Hey, do you remember this from passage 33 of Song of Myself? He's talking about the wounded and dying. You'll remember firemen, right? In this passage, agonies are one of my changes of garments. I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I myself become the wounded person. My hurts turn livid upon me as I lean on a cane and observe. Do you remember this? He says, I lie in the night air in my red shirt. This is the fallen and the dying fireman. The pervading hush is for my sake. Painless after all, I lie exhausted, but not so unhappy. White and beautiful are the faces around me, and the heads are bared of their fire caps. The kneeling crowd fades with the light of the torches. Now notice, we're back to this use of the word exhaust, only now, here obviously it's sexual. He says, only that we enjoy each other and exhaust each other if it must be so. Now this if it must be so is central. Don't miss it. In other words, the procreant urge is necessary. Okay? Now he can be speaking obviously literally, or he can be speaking obviously politically and metaphorically as well. Right? I think he learned some of this thing about necessity from his study of the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary. This if it must be so. Go back and look at our lecture on the Declaration of Independence as a powerful persuasive argument that Jefferson makes that we don't have a choice. Here, I think Whitman's borrowing heavily. In other words, this is the way that it is. Notice the power now of the rhetorical questions as they come back. He says, as the parenthetic finishes, from the master, the pilot, he says, I yield the vessel to. Now this is an interesting reference, and some have seen this as, the Platonism that we talk about in our study of Republic. That is to say, who's in charge here? Notice he keeps going, the general, and we know that he loves to use this language, obviously his time during the war to help lay it out. The general commanding me, commanding all. From him, permission taking. From time, the program hastening. Notice it's the use of the word program here. I have, and then in parentheses, I have loitered too long as it is. Again, I lean and loaf, and here it's loitered. From sex, from the warp and the woof. You'll remember this Song of Myself, passage 3, right? Always sex, always a knit of identity. Now, I think that Whitman learned a lot from his study of Homer. Remember, primarily self-taught, right? And you'll remember that in Homer's Odyssey, especially, although we talked about it in the Iliad and the Aeneid, we gave full lectures on every book of those three great epic poems. But remember in the Odyssey I said that one of the central mantras and motifs is that weaving. You'll remember, of course, Penelope will put off the suitors. How? By weaving, of course, right? This idea of weaving and the way that a warp and a woof will weave, I mean, you know, it's kind of fascinating. Any garment, that, like the garment that you're wearing, is made up of two different directions of string, right, that have been interwoven. This is a powerful word picture, and it's one that Whitman will love. Now, To Think of Time is another poem. We're going to come back to this. There it will be the weft and the warp. It's the same concept, though. You bring together this weaving together from sex, from the warp and the woof, from privacy, from frequent repinings alone. Whitman is aware that so much of the longing to be with another is something that is endured alone, from plenty of persons near, and yet the right person not near. I've had some students that say, of all the lines that I've read thus far in Leaves of Grass, this is the one that I most can relate to. Look at it again, from plenty of persons near, and yet the right person not near. I could sit in a room with all these people, but I've never felt so alone, and all of a sudden, my person comes in, and there it is. That's the one I want to be with. He says, I long for that. From the soft sliding, now we're just going to get patently sexual, obviously, but it can be read metaphorically as well, which is why I think standing behind all of this is just Whitman smiling all the time. From the soft sliding of hands over me and thrusting of fingers through my hair and beard. Now, obviously, we come back to, like Milton, the love of hair and the importance of hair. Whitman the same way. Of course, Song of Myself, passage 5, and the beard thing is we already have gone over this many times. From the long sustained kiss, remember in passage 46, I kiss you with a goodbye kiss, upon the mouth or bosom, from the close pressure that makes me or any man drunk, fainting with excess. Again, before it was madness, now it's drunk, fainting with excess. From what the divine husband knows. Now, this divine husband, some has taken many readers back to the pilot, back to the commander, to God himself, right? Notice here, the divine husband knows from the work of fatherhood. Obviously, here's the phallic information again. From exaltation, victory, and relief from the bedfellow's embrace in the night. Again, we're back to passage 3. I think you've got to read Song of Myself, passage 3, to be able to really appreciate what's being done here. From the act poems of eyes, hands, hips, and bosoms. Now, this is amazing, this act poems. Notice it's a hyphenated word. Whitman loves to do this kind of thing. What? Act poems as opposed to what? Well, written poems, like the very poems that you're reading here, right? That is to say, all of life is like a poem or a drama, right? And he, I think, learned this as well from his Shakespeare. From the act poems of eyes, hands, hips, and bosoms. By the way, this referencing eyes, hands, lips is not, if you're going, where have I heard that before? That's, of course, John Donne's Valediction Forbidding Morning. Go back and take a look at our lecture there. Notice, and I think that Whitman knows exactly what he's doing. Instead of lips, eyes, hands, lips to miss, he injects the word hips and then bosoms. And of course, as we've said already in our study of Leaves of Grass, it's amazing how he references hips all the way through. So he's playing games with us. I cannot help but believe he's smiling all the way through it, having a bit of fun. And if you're a close reader, you're picking up on a whole bunch of this. For example, go back to our lecture on Valediction Forbidding Morning, the great John Donne poem on love, and then come back to this line, and you can't help but kind of smile. From the clean, we've seen how he loves this word, clean, of the trembling arm. From the bending curve, we've seen already this before in passage 5 of, for example, of Song of Myself. From the bending curve and the clinch, again back to wrestling, obviously this is very sexual language, from side by side, the pliant coverlet, the sheet, off throwing. Now, I pause at a moment like this and I say, this is why we love to read before we read. In other words, if you've read your Milton, and especially Paradise Lost, we've given full lectures in each of the books of Paradise Lost, you remember in book number 4, as Adam and Eve for the first time are going to have sex. You'll remember this was radical for Milton in his day to argue that before, we call it prelapsarian, before the quote-unquote fall that will occur, right? That Milton is going to argue that Adam and Eve actually engage in sexual intercourse, which is a radical idea because so many people from Augustine on had argued that in fact sex and the sex act is part of the fall, and before it we have no kind of exchange. But notice, we'll have this set of lines, and we talked about this elsewhere in more detail. I'll let you go back and find those lectures at learnstrong.net, but do you remember these lines? This said unanimously in other rites, observing none but adoration pure, which God likes best, into their inmost bower handed they went. You'll remember, of course, holding hands versus not holding hands is central. The last lines of Paradise Lost, they're holding hands. Here we are with Adam and Eve, right? And eased the putting off these troublesome disguises which we wear. Straight, side by side were laid, nor turned, I ween, Adam from his fair spouse, nor Eve the rites mysterious of conjugal love refused. Whatever hypocrites astutely talk of purity in place and innocence, defaming as impure what God declares pure and commands to some, leaves free to all. The fact that the word leaves is even used in this line, I think Whitman is having all kinds of Miltonic fun through leaves of grass, as I've said many times. Our Maker bids increase, who bids abstain, but our destroyer, foe to God and man. You could make the argument that Whitman is saying the same thing in this set of lines here. Hail, wedded love, mysterious law, true source of human offspring, sole propriety and paradise of all things, common else. Did you see it? Straight, side by side. Go back and look at the line again. From side by side, the pliant coverlet, off throwing. It's wonderful the way Whitman will play with Milton, all the way through Leaves of Grass. From the one so unwilling to have me leave. Go back to that passage 3 at the very end of Song of Myself, passage 3, where there's separation that's happened after the evening engagement, right? He says, from one so unwilling to have me leave, and me just as unwilling to leave. The way that the word leave and leaves of grass gets played over and over again in Leaves of Grass is truly brilliant. Then, more parenthetics to finish now the poem. Yet a moment, O tender waiter, and I return. Now, of course, he can be speaking to and about a lover, or he can be speaking directly to the reader of this poem. I'll be right back, I'll be right back. So I'm not going anywhere. Of course, you'll remember at the end of Song of Myself, he said, I'll be there under your boot soles in the dirt, right? And then to finish, from the hour of shining stars and drooping dews, obviously the sexual union has now consummated, and we are at the end of all of that. Obviously, the word dropping, right? Dropping. From the night, a moment, I, emerging, and then an interesting verb, flitting out. It's flight, right? Flight. Celebrate you, act divine. All right? We're not celebrating an individual here, it's the very act, the procreative act, the sexual act. And you, children, remember this is called children of Adam, prepared for, and you, stalwart loins. Now the fact that he uses the word celebrate takes us back obviously to passage 1 of Song of Myself. I celebrate myself and sing myself, right? Notice we finish with this stalwart loins. In other words, strong, procreative, masculine it will be the language from before. Well, let's finish quickly. At 2a. Well, obviously, not only is sex a beautiful thing for Whitman, but all creation is beautiful. Right. At 2b, notice all of the sexual and the orgasmic language, the repetitions of O. At 3a, All of the echoes, as we've been pointing them out, obviously are Milton. I as well wanted to point out again this thing about Homer and Virgil and the whole notion of weaving. And what great storytellers do, what great poets do, is they weave. Finally, at 3b, to own this text for yourself, what is your own view of sexuality, of creativity? Right? Do you think it should be celebrated? And now that you've studied this poem with me, why do you think this set of lines was so radical for its day and in 1860? And now that we finish this set of lines, we're going to get really crazy with I Sing the Body Electric. I hope you'll come back and study some more. Thank you.